I really want to ask my friend, my partner in crime, Chris McChesney, to come up and begin to get this party started. Thank you.
Wow. PJ, thank you. My dad would have liked that introduction. My mom would have believed you. I'm more than a little humbled to be here. We've got some of the best consultants in our organization here. We handpicked a group to work with you for the next 2 days. And it's been interesting to have our heads in your space for a couple of weeks as we've prepared for this. And to say that this is heavy is an understatement. This is one of these issues. You start to think about this, and there's part of you that doesn't want to think about this. And the implications. And last night, everybody, show me your hand if you were here last night. Was there anybody in the room that didn't think exactly what BJ said when they watched those beautiful kids last night, given why we're here and what we're doing? This is really important work. We're standing on holy ground. Even a little impact is not a small thing. And a lot of impact, as is the case in Georgia, went down as the most important work I've ever been associated with. Right? People say, what's your best project? Who's your favorite leader? BJ Walker and that project. We had 2,000 organizational rollouts of this methodology before we wrote the book in 2012. And we picked 4 to highlight in the book. And BJ wrote a chapter, and we used her story. All this is, let me just demystify this right up front. This session is not about this methodology or this approach. This session is about having a significant impact on a problem you all didn't create, but you've been tasked to help. This is a methodology that just brings focus. And if you've ever achieved anything, right, everything that you've achieved in your life, when you look back and you say, what was going on? You were focused. And focusing an organization is a hard thing to do for a bunch of reasons. We're going to talk about that. Are you okay with fast? Like, we're going to go crazy fast. Like, this whole 2 days is going to go crazy fast, all right? And BJ, just holler at me if I stop making sense, okay? The first time I worked with her and all of her directors over an organization of 20,000 people, I would say a bunch of stuff in my typical fast New York way, and then she would just sort of look at me like, I need to talk now, Chris. And so I would shut up, and she would then translate everything I had said to her group. And that started a wonderful 10-year friendship. We've stayed very close for a long time. All right. Organizations, and I wish everybody knew this. Organizations everywhere have a really, really difficult time focusing. Some of those reasons have to do with just what organizations are. Some of them have to do with some inherent human nature that all of us have. But what I wish is that I could tell everyone, you're not alone. Like, every leadership team we meet with thinks they're the crazy ones. We're surviving despite ourselves. I just can't. If anybody ever knew, I swear I'd lose my job. I manage crazy. Right? Everybody, and I just want to tell them, everybody says the same thing. Right? So right off the bat, just know nobody is really good at this inherently. And we're going to get into why and some very basic things that we can do to move it forward. So let me tell you how this starts. There's this crazy Harvard business professor named Ram Charan. He's from India. He doesn't own a home. He flies from CEO to CEO all over the world, and there's someone who sends him suits on the road. This is a true story. This is how this guy behaves. And he sends his money back to his family in India. It's Ram Charan. Some of you may have seen his books already, but he's working with our organization. Franklin Covey's been developing leaders for 30 years. That's our thing. He asks us 2 questions, and it changes everything for us. I'm going to ask you the same 2 questions he asked us. His first question was, what do leaders, Franklin Covey and all your experience, what do leaders struggle with more? Do leaders struggle more with the plan, the strategy, or do they struggle more with the execution of the plan? What do you think what would you have said, strategy or execution? That's what we said. His second question got us. He said, what are they educated in? You get a business, you get a master's of public administration, right? Or you take a business class, you do anything around organization. What do you learn? Do you learn execution or do you learn strategy? You learn strategy and business planning, that's right. So the whole thing is reversed. All right, so this is where we're going to go right now. We're just going to accept that every organization struggles with this. We're going to get into why, and we're going to get into some very basic principles that work. Good enough? All right, so here's the first thing I want you to think about. Oh, and by the way, just a little context. Sorry. I'm more comfortable down here. So what's going on? So there's really, I think about all this work into sort of 4 boxes. The first one is defining the targets and objective. That work has been done, and when I'm done, Director Walker is going to take us through the targets. Right? That's the first step in focusing. Then, for the next 2 days, we're going to really get into a system for focusing our organization. You know how I say, this is like a giant magnifying glass. We've got dozens of teams, organizations, institutions, and the vision behind all of this is that we're going to bring a whole lot of light on a very specific, very critical target. Right? We're going to, everybody's seen the power when you focus light. And that's what we're going to do. So over the next 2 days, we're going to learn this process, and then we're going to start the work. We're going to create little execution models that are going to get used. But I think more importantly, you're going to really you're going to be like, I get what this is. I get why this works. Right? There's no voodoo here. I see it. And either this is something that my organization and institution wants to be a part of, or we don't. And if we are part of it, I know what's going to be expected of us. We're going to be part of that. We're going to be part of that magnifying glass reaction on a really, really super critical, important objective. Right? Then the third step would be to really finish what's got started here back in your organizations, to really lock it down for our entity, for our group. Get back. You won't be in intact teams while you're here. We're going to deliberately mix you up. You're going to be working on different teams' issues, but we're going to mix you up just so we don't stay in our, like what BJ said, we don't just stay in our lanes. We see this problem from other directions, and we get a lot of fresh thinking. We harvest a lot of ideas out of this session. But step 3 is critical because then you got to put the wheels on this thing. Going back into your organization, locking it down, and by the way, we're big on simplicity. We want to keep this as simple as possible. It's a really critical rule for execution. And then finally, we're going to run this thing. And when BJ Walker runs something, she runs it. There was a meeting in a very, very tall building in Atlanta, and half the room were directors, and the other half the room was any media that wanted to show up. And the media could ask her anything she wanted. This meeting happened every week. The media could ask her anything that she wanted, but first they had to listen to all the directors report on last week's commitments and what the commitment is for this week. When she decides to execute, it's happening. Okay? And so this is what, right? So if you get on this train's going to go. So this is a little bit what this is about. Do I want to get on the train? All right. So let's get back to this topic, this thing that befuddles everybody of execution. Right? You are here, by the way. That's where we are. And the first thing I want you to think about, so now just, right, for a second, pull away from the big topic and just think about your own leadership experience. Anything you do as a leader to improve the operation, not just running it, but anything you do to improve the operation falls into these 2 buckets. This is a really important place to start. The first bucket we call stroke of the pen, and that's a really good term. It means exactly what you think. You did it with a stroke of a pen. I got money, I got authority, this thing's happening. But we don't always say it like that. We get consensus, and we're nice, but we're doing this thing. Right? And it's happening, and it's got big consequences, and it takes brains, and it takes guts, but it's happening. And it's funny, because people who have never been in leadership roles really believe this is what being a leader is. Right? It's so naive, isn't it? They're like, oh, if I was in charge, I would do this, and I would do that, and I would do this, and that's been... And then they get in charge, and they realize absolutely no one is listening. Like, what a ripoff! At the first, how little power you actually have is the biggest ripoff in leadership. Right? And there's this other thing called behavioral change. Oh, right? This, you know how you know you're over here? You can't write a memo and expect it to be done. You know, we would love for you to be more consultative in your casework. Thank you so much, the boss. Okay, what's next on the agenda? Now that that's done, right? Or worse, this is changing. Now, by the way, you can get some behavior change on the left, and there's a word for it, and the word is compliance. Right? We drive the heck out of compliance, and compliance and commitment are not the same thing, right? You get different things from those two different things. And it's not just that, it's not a Sunday school perspective that, well, commitment is nobler and better, and we need everybody commit. There's just certain things that will not happen if they don't care. Right? I can't get through that wall if they don't care. I need certain things to happen when I'm not looking. Is changing human behavior easy? Changing your own behavior easy or hard? Changing somebody else's behavior. How about a whole bunch of somebody else's? How about this? I love that you're laughing, because you're going to either laugh or cry any minute now. How about when it's in their best interest? I mean, people are logical, right? Once they understand, once they see it, they'll change, right? How about this? How about when they tell you they will? Okay, don't question anybody's integrity, right? Have you ever been driving to work and you realize that you didn't used to talk to yourself? And you're mumbling, and it's coming out like, oh, for the love of heaven, people, can we just do this one thing? You told me you would. My wife has one piece of advice for her young friends. She says, honey, don't marry a fixer-upper. And I'm always in the room. I know exactly who she's talking about. All right, this is hard. We had a senior engineer, part of a team that was building a fighter plane for Lockheed Martin, and I couldn't understand anything these people talked about. They were very intimidating to me. This one engineer, he understood this. He said, look, harder than getting another 10 pounds out of the landing gear assembly. It was all about reducing weight. He said, was doing anything that required the engineers to change their behavior. Right? He says, everything else can be figured out. This was voodoo. All right, so far so good on this? We think when it comes to achieving organizational objectives, that right side will be the hardest thing for most people's careers. You with me on this? You buy this? Yeah. Okay. Very few leaders think when they hit this wall, and everybody hits this wall, very few leaders think, and I'm included in this, I wish I was better at this. Like, that's not the thought that goes, for whatever reason. In other areas it does. But for some reason, when you hit this area on the right, the thought is not, I wish I was a better leader at driving things that required commitment. We don't go there. What you're more likely to hear is, oh, I wish I didn't have Robin, Steve, and Mike on my team. Now this, laughter's confession, by the way, kids. This is where the brain goes. And hey, why not blame the people? I mean, let's be real. They're the ones not doing it. We've shown them, we've trained them, we talked till we're blue in the face. They told us they would. And this is where the conversation ends for most people, and this is where it would have ended for us Except there was this guy, you may know this name, Edwards Deming. You ever heard that name? Not such a big hit in Detroit, but they loved him in Tokyo. This is the father of the quality movement. We have Toyota and Honda because of, in large part, Edwards Deming. And they still revere him. They have instead of the Malcolm Baldrige Award in Japan, it's the Deming Award. Deming said, and it's really key to this topic, that any time the majority of people behave a particular way, the majority of the time, majority of the people, the majority of the time, the problem is not the people. All right. You may be complaining about them. You may be saying, the problem is in the system, and that comes back on the leaders. And not just big systems, but little systems. And I got an operations director who's got this idea down, and I'm a big complainer, and every time I start blaming the people, Michelle stops me and says, Chris, is that the majority of the people the majority of the time? I got to own that. Now, a person, an individual, can be a problem. A person can be belligerent, defiant, and Deming had a word for that. He called that special cause. But that ain't what we're doing today. Right? So what have we said so far? Execution's harder than strategy. The kind of execution that's really hard is the kind that requires a change in human behavior, and we don't get to blame the people. So far, so good? All right, these are hard rules. All right, at the heart of this, and believe me, we went everywhere. We had 12 root cause breakdowns of execution. We did ridiculous amounts of research, and I'll tell you, it really came down to one thing. And the thing was so obvious, for years we couldn't see it. You ever had anything like that in your life, where the answer was always right there and you never saw it? There's a cute expression that fish are often the last to discover water. Isn't that great? Isn't that a great expression? You'd be surprised how useful that is. Why would a fish be the last to discover water? They're in it. It's always been there. It's never been anything else. All right, what I'm about to show you is like discovering water, but it is the reason that execution, particularly the behavioral kind, breaks down. Inside of every one of your teams, every one of your organizations is a rub or a clash going on, whether you're aware of it or not. On one side is the day job. We gave it a name, we call it the whirlwind. It is the massive amount of energy required to just keep this thing going. And it's not the same as the energy to move the organization forward. These are both necessary, they're both good, but they don't get along, do they? They compete for time, energy, and attention, and one of them is an 800-pound gorilla in the relationship. Who's the 800-pound gorilla? Let me ask you this. Did anybody wake up this morning and go, that's today? Oh, please, no. I love this whole thing. I'm so excited to be part of this. Don't let this be today. I got to be out of my mind. Is anybody doing email right now? So this is, by the way, this is a really fundamental issue. It's fun to talk about because everybody relates to it, but let me tell you what's going on. Inside the brain, this stuff gets interpreted, right? The whirlwind gets interpreted as urgent. Right now. The goals for moving the organization forward, I might agree with, I might be passionate about. I consider them very important. This is why leaders go crazy. They don't understand how people who believe something support something, and then they can't get the action around it. You start to doubt your sanity after a while. You ever been going, I knew it was going to be hard. I didn't think it was going to be this hard. You're not alone. Right? The brain interprets the stuff on the right as important. Here's the problem. In the moment, where do human beings go? Urgent or important? We go urgent every time. And life's nothing but a series of moments. Right? You have the 17-year-old kid who wakes up and realizes the science project is due today. He had 4 months, he did nothing. There's a comedian, Brian Regan, does a whole bit on it where the kid goes and gets a cup of dirt and wants to submit that as his science project. He says, give me an F and move on, would you? You know, what was happening? What was happening for 4 months? Right? This kid is now, it's a nightmare. It's not like he didn't care. He's living a nightmare, but he got here. So here's what we think. There's this sneaky little human flaw that all of us have to wrestle with. That in the moment, we will go urgent over important, no matter how important the important thing is. I'm not arguing with you, boss. I love the great idea. I love that. You keep thinking, boss. That's what you're good at. I just got to get back. I'm not lazy. I'm not defiant. I'm not stupid. I am busy. The trick with execution is not executing a goal in the middle of 100 miles. The trick with execution is not executing a goal. It's executing in the middle of a 100-mile-an-hour whirlwind. Can I get an amen on that? Amen. That is, like, you've got to lock that in your head. That's the whole thing, okay? Now, I want to go a little deeper, and I want to put some of what we talked about in a little bit of context. And I'm having my clicker's not wanting to behave right now. Okay, good. So a couple of things. So when you're thinking about why is this so hard, one of the strategic barriers. Any of the Franklin Covey team or anyone else have another clicker? So much easier. Oh, here we go. I guess I'm gonna have to stay close to my computer. Darn it. All right. So we talked about the whirlwind. It only works when I click. Oh, only when I click. Thank you, BJ. See why we work together so well? All right, so the whirlwind we talked about. And then that's just the day-to-day. And then there are the crises that come through and kill everything. Right? They even kill the whirlwind. It's like all of a sudden, all hands on deck. Right? And then there's complexity. Wow, are we going to try and push through this? Right? Execution does not like complexity. If I start talking to any of you about this problem, right, it's going to take an hour and I'm going to want to take a nap afterwards. Right? And the two best friends of execution are simplicity and transparency. Anybody can do complex. Everything gets complex. Can we, one of the things we want to do at the end of these 2 days, can we get it down to simplicity? Right? And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about this, is a sense of futility. Like this, this is so brutal to the human soul. This feeling of, we're boiling the ocean. I can't see a winnable game. People who were so excited when they started their career and they weren't driven by money and they weren't driven by self-interest. They were motivated because they honestly wanted to make a difference in the world, right? And then a year later, that fire is gone. And so these are organizations in one way or another live with this. Fair enough? Okay, so in your mind, if you think about where your organization's trying to go, we've said there's three things. We said there's stroke of the pen, right? All the things you can do with money and authority. There's the whirlwind, there's the day job, right? Maintaining your operation. And a lot of times, a lot of your metrics live there. These are your KPIs, key performance indicators, right? And if that's all I had, I might be okay. Right? I got my key chess moves over there. I got my metrics over here. I think I got this thing. But inevitably, there is this middle column, which is behavior. What's the definition of insanity? Keep doing expecting A. This thing always shows up. And remember what we said, these two things, they don't like each other. Is that a fair picture of what's going on? Okay, now, the next 2 days, we're not talking about the left side, and we're not talking about the right side. We're attacking something in the middle. Now, I got one watch out for you before we go there, and it's this little bell curve. And what that means is the people whose behavior has to change are sort of in three groups, and it always looks like a bell curve. And this is not just your organization, this is everywhere. We got the nevers, the not yets, and the models. Can you figure it out? The models are already doing it. Sometimes they do it before you even think it. On the other side are the nevers. You know why we call them nevers? Because it ain't happening. And by the way, the next 2 days, we got nothing for you. I got no answers for your nevers. We have not written that book. I don't know who's going to, but it won't be me. But you know why I'm showing you this? Because guess where everybody's brain in this room goes when we start talking about execution? You always go to the nevers. They're not the opportunity. But you know who always gets ignored? The not yets. Yeah, the models get some praise. And you spend your time at night thinking about those nevers. Oh, she does it just to spite me. I know she does. What did I ever do with her? Right? So this is what we're gonna use this term, move the middle. By the way, didn't that just give you some psychological air right there? Just to say, okay, I don't have to own that. All right. Every execution success we've ever had, it's always been about the middle. And then there's this other crazy thing that happens, and I never say it, but I'm going to say it right now. There are a handful of nevers who are actually models in disguise. They're people who cannot handle crazy, they cannot handle ambiguity, and the minute one of them locks into something that feels like a winnable game, they go right to the front of the class. Right? But we don't know who they are. We don't know which of your nevers are really models until we really create a clear, simple, winnable game, and then they show up. And we always hear this. All right, so for the next 2 days, we're going in the middle. And I want you to just start thinking about this as it relates to the big problem. Reducing death and serious injury from children birth to 3 years old. Right. As it relates to your institution, to your organization, is there something relevant to that topic that lives at this intersection? So you got to kind of play with me for just a minute, because it's going to sound like I'm talking crazy. This intersection is the intersection of really important and it ain't going to happen. All right, now that sounds crazy. Why would anything really important not happen? All right, but except for the fact that all of you are thinking of something. So in the afternoon sessions, we're going to start harvesting these little sub-objectives. We got a way to organize them, right? But we want you to start thinking, because this is an uncomfortable place for your brain to go, where you say, it cannot be like this 6 months from now. And if I'm honest with myself, if we keep doing what we're doing, it is not going to change. All right? When you get at that intersection, you know you're getting warm. All right. We're going right there. All right, I got good news and bad news. The good news for that middle section, which is the hardest thing any leader ever has to do. The good news is there are rules for doing it. There are rules, and they work every time. The good news is there are rules. The bad news is there are rules. And these rules don't care about you. They don't care what you think. They don't care if you agree. They don't care if you like it. They don't care who your boss is. They don't care how crazy the organization is around you. They just dish out predictive. I'll give you the perfect example of this. You've probably heard this. The 4 rules of flight: lift, thrust, weight, and drag. It's a really interesting idea that says the whole field hinges on 4 rules. Like, if you understand the application of lift, thrust, weight, and drag, you can put a 747 in the air. You ever stood on the ground by one of the big jets? Like, not in the jetway, it's not the same. But in some airports, you actually got to get up a ladder to get in some of the. Have you ever done this? What goes through every human being's mind when you're standing on the tarmac? It fills this room, right? Or more. What goes through every person's mind? Right? There's this part of your brain ain't buying none of it. You're in Australia and you're like, I'm sorry, but there's no way that flies. All right, take a pause. The thing flies. And the reason it flies is because it obeys natural law. This one idea is what started Dr. Covey, 40 years ago, that the key is not best practices. There's lots of best practices, and they don't always apply. The key are principles. Can you find, like, if any of you read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, those are the root principles of human effectiveness. There's a reason that sold 50 million copies. People, you know when you see them, they hit that truth button. All right, so we're going to tell you that when it comes to this other thing, that was human thing, when it comes to just focusing an organization, there are 4 principles, and it's not lift, thrust, weight, and drag. It's focus, leverage, engagement, and accountability. And it's the kind of the play within those. All right, here we go. Number 1, you know this. This is the operative word. Right? And all 4 disciplines are really about focus, but we actually call the first one that. By the way, could anyone grab me a bottle of water? You got one right there? You got an extra? Bless your soul. All right. This is a diagram we've used for a long time, and people remember this 10 years after we show it. So I'm not worried about you forgetting this one. On the top are the number of new things, in addition to the whirlwind, that a team, we're going to get you to think a lot about the front lines of your institutions and organizations, where the work gets done, right? And what we know is that that team, over the course of a year, this is what we've observed in 15 years of doing this, right? If that team has 2 to 3 objectives in addition to the day job, the whirlwind, they're in a pretty good position to get 2 to 3 done. If that same team loads up on 4 to 10, how many are going to get done now? What do you think? Yeah, it goes backwards. This has a name. This is called the law of diminishing returns. It's as real as gravity. You can ignore it. It will not ignore you. At 11 to 20, how many are we getting done now? Yeah, it's going back. And that doesn't mean there's no results. It just means leadership is sort of along for the ride. That's a horrible feeling if you're in leadership. With me, it's Monday mornings. I wake up and I'm like, I hope nobody knows that these levers are not attached to anything. That's a terrible feeling. All right, here's the problem. The 11 to 20 in the upper right-hand corner, are they good ideas or bad ideas? What do you think? Probably all good ideas. So what are you going to have to say no to? We hate this. There will always be more good ideas than there is capacity to execute. Bank on that. We found a font called Papyrus because we wanted it to look like a scripture. I don't know if you can see down there, it says it's from the book of Execution. Chapter 4, verse 37. I think that's after Leviticus. All right, so there's 2 traps. The first trap is saying yes to all the good ideas. Right? You're done right there, right? And then the second trap is turning everything in the whirlwind into a goal. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean you have to try and optimize it. Okay? In the whirlwind, all right, are a lot of different metrics. This is where the complexity starts to come in. All right, I'm going to try and put a little oxygen back in the room right now. It's okay to give the day job 80% of your energy and the organization's energy. Like, isn't that just like great to just say it? Like, and by the way, people really like when you acknowledge how big the day job is. Give it 80%. Will it take 100 if you let it? It'll take your weekends. It'll never stop eating. Right? But don't let it go to 100. Can we sustain the day-to-day operation and not just bounce from crisis to indicator to indicator? Right? And if we can, this is how execution starts. We got to have this line in our brain. These teams, at the team level, we call it +1. Can that leader hold down the day job +1, plus blow the doors off of something? And we use that 20%. That's where the 4 disciplines lives on that right side. We're not saying to only do one thing. We say, no, you got to do 80%, you got to do a lot of stuff, but there's one thing we're going to blow the doors off. There's one thing we're going to apply this treatment to. That's all this is. So over the next 2 days, you're thinking about what can we apply this medicine to? What can we apply this execution treatment to that would really make a big difference? Right? But recognize that's only going to be about 20%. Now, one day that becomes habit. That just becomes the way your operation runs. Where does that dial now go? Goes back in. We get something else. We call that land one plane at a time. Right? I'm from Atlanta. Busiest airport in the world. I had a graphic, but I left it out. But there's something like 30 planes within a 50-mile radius circling Atlanta. And they're tracking them all, just like you got to track a lot of stuff. But how do they land them? They bring them down one at a time. There's a good, and it's a sane approach to this thing. Okay, so as you're thinking about this, there's a couple of things, and you're going to be you're going to be rolling up your sleeves and diving into this in the afternoon. We're going to mix you all up. You're going to pick particular groups or organizations, and then you're going to build out these execution models. And for instance, reduce incident rate that lead to death and serious injury by 50%. This is what started all the work that BJ and I and others were involved in Georgia. Okay, that's a big goal, right? And it's hard, overwhelming. And what we want to do is we want to break that thing down. And you'll hear this term battles. When NASA was trying to go to the moon, this is a fabulous story. The moon was overwhelming. Like, we look back on the moon like something we were supposed to do. And every time our cords get tangled, we're like, we can put a man on the moon, but they can't make a cord that won't tangle. We think that this was outrageous, going to the moon. Well, one of the NASA engineers asked the question, what are the fewest battles necessary to win the war? And NASA came up with 3. Navigation, propulsion, and life support. Leaders really like this model in our experience because it begs 2 questions. Hey, what's our man on the moon? Like, in addition to maintaining the operation, what's that one thing we want to go after? What's our +1? And then, if it's a big organization, we got to break it down. We're not asking what's everything we can do to put a man on the moon. That's not what NASA said. They said, what are the fewest battles necessary? Okay, and then once you know what those battles are, then teams, I can reach that. Like, I can play that game. That's what's going to be happening over the next 2 days. We've got a big high-level war. We've got some battles and some categories, and then you're going to be looking at your institution, at your operation, and saying, you know what? We could make a difference there. We want to be part of the magnifying glass. We want to play. Right? We're going to pick some of these targets. We're going to break this thing down from big targets to little targets. And you will be shocked at how much progress you can make when you start hitting little targets. It's funny, when you break this out, 2 things happen. Whether you're in teams today, whether you're back with your organization together as an organization, when you start this, every team's got 2 types of people. They got the dreamers and the realists, right? And the dreamers, right? The dreamers are always, BJ and I identified ourselves last night as just chronic dreamers. The dreamers are like, oh, we can do that and more, right? And the pragmatists are like, you can't do anything. You can't see all the problems. Well, when you stop talking conceptually and you start to identify targets, we stop talking past each other. And the dreamer becomes a little more pragmatic. And the realist becomes a little more hopeful when they go, you're right, if you did hit those 3 battles, that's more than enough to win that war. Right? And you start to create hope and realism And that's a big part. I could talk for a long time on this, but I don't want to. I want to keep moving. So you're going to feel more of this. There's 4 rules. Fewest battles. You don't need to capture this. We'll go through this with you later. Fewest battles necessary to win the war. We're looking for one. This is what you're going to be doing. One of these targets at some entity in your organization that's right on the front line. Right? One WIG. Oh, that I haven't told you what that is. WIG just means wildly important goal. It's like whatever we're applying this treatment to, that's code. That's code for we're putting the 4 disciplines against a WIG. It's easy for people to remember. Okay, 1 WIG per team, right? +1. You can veto, but don't dictate. If you're in an organizational setting, and let's say you've got several sub-teams, let them pick. Like, this blows people's minds, but you can't. Let them pick. Right? If they know what they're aligning to. You can veto and say, try again, but that's not the same, right? People have to have their way, but they don't have to have, people have to have their say, but they don't have to have their way. And we know that's true because it rhymes. If your mom told you something and it rhymed, you got to do that. And every one of these, and we won't quite get here, this will take a little bit of work. It needs to be in this X to Y by when form. Starting line, finish line, deadline. That's how you know you're not dealing with a concept. You're dealing with a target. It's very difficult to execute on concepts. Okay, so BJ was just talking about this. Decrease the number of recurring substantiated, I can't read today, maltreatment, right? How many recurring cases of child maltreatment? From 6% to 3%. They got under 3% across the whole state, right? That started with a starting line, a finish line, and a deadline. Oh, Kennedy, perfect example. We just talked about the moon. Put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely home. Starting line is Earth. What's the finish line? The moon and back, right? That was important for recruiting. I got like one joke, people. That was it. Right? By when? And he had a deadline. What was the deadline? End of the day, right? He doesn't put that deadline, this thing never happens. And this takes guts. I remember the meeting, BJ, where your team first started to talk about reducing death and serious injury. And I hope this is okay to say, but there was legal counsel in the room that was waving her off. Like, if you set that as a goal, that's like admitting you're the problem. This is going to open us up for litigation. This is going to... they took the risk. That's leadership. The consequences of potential legality versus the ability to have an effect on human suffering. They took the risk. Where's your general counsel? She's in the room. Right here. Did you raise your? No, you're not general. Where's general counsel? Oh, she's that way over there. Why? BJ just wanted to make sure you heard all that. You're writing it down. We were afraid of that. All right, folks. So here's the big idea. Step 1, and we're going to do this a little bit light. We're going to put more time on step 2 over the next 2 days. But step 1 is going from a concept, right, to the fewest targets at the front line. Right? Now, there's going to be work that's going to happen after this session, but you're going to start to create what those frontline targets might look like. And we're going to start lining those up within certain categories. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? This isn't algebra. This is arithmetic, man. It just lines up. This is Newtonian. It's straight lines. What are the fewest targets necessary to hit that thing? We're going to put energy against a lot of very meaningful targets, and it will matter.